May you live in interesting times is an ancient Chinese curse, believe it or not. Chinese people wish this on people that they don't like. Now the reason this was brought to mind was one of my favorite web comics, which is xkcd.com, for those of you who don't have anything better to do when you get back to your cubes, did a spoof on May You Live in Interesting Times, and this is how the cartoon went. It was the cross-section of a skyscraper, and on every floor is row after row of cubes with little people sitting at them typing on their keyboards. And outside the window, the girlfriend of one of the characters is rappelling down the side of the building, and she says, "You know those people who think may you have an interesting life is a curse?" And he says, "Yeah." And she says, "Well, the heck with those people. You want to have an adventure?" So they go off to have the adventure. Now that got me thinking about why this phrase is considered a curse. Why would you wish this upon people that you didn't like? And the reason is that when the Chinese talk about interesting times, it's usually bad things. It's things like war and civil unrest and uncertainty, massive change. Now, then as now, that's not what people are looking for in their lives. They're looking for what we call today the American dream. Big house with a lawn, 2-car garage with a couple of big SUVs inside of it, 2.4 children. Those are the sorts of things that people wish for people that they like. And that's what people seek out. Even back then, the equivalent of 2 SUVs and 2.4 children. Now, ironically, there has been analysis done on happiness and what actually makes us happy and what we believe makes us happy. It's the field is called positive psychology. And a professor at Harvard named Daniel Gilbert wrote a book called Stumbling on Happiness. And it's about how many of the things that we think make us happy do not actually make us happy. And he made a lot of interesting discoveries, and the one that I thought was most interesting was the old saw about money can't buy you happiness turns out to be wrong. The interesting part, though, is how much money it actually takes to buy happiness. How much would you think? 100 grand a year, $250,000, $1 million a year? How much money would it require to buy you happiness? As it turns out, $40,000 a year. That's for a family of 2.4 kids. $40,000 a year is it. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about utter blissful happiness. This is how it works. As your income increases from zero up to $40,000, your average reported level of happiness rises in pretty much a linear fashion. Once you get up to $40,000, it starts to tail off. And the reason for that is that once you've got $40,000 coming in, you're covering food, clothing, and shelter. Once you have those basics, that's about as happy as money is ever going to make you. Now, if you don't have the $40,000, very little that you do can make you happy, unless you're Mother Teresa and are willing to live in abject poverty in the service of your cause. But for most people, you need that 40 grand. But more than that, doesn't actually make you any happier. And this was an unusual thing because pretty much everybody in this country thinks, I can't afford to starve on 40 grand a year. We need more than that, with a family and kids and so forth. I've got kids myself, and I can vouch for the feeling that way. But he discovered that it really doesn't help. So the question is, what do we do instead? Now, the other epiphany that I had, I wish that was working today. The other epiphany that I had about this comic was that we are living in interesting times right now, because everything that I mentioned, war, civil unrest, massive change, uncertainty, all of that is taking place right now. Now, we typically think that the times that we live in are boring and other people have lived in interesting times, but we are living in interesting times right now. The problem with living in interesting times is, as I mentioned, it makes it harder to accomplish the American dream. But since we've discovered that the American dream is not really all it's cracked up to be, what do we go after instead? Another professor, this time out on the West Coast at Claremont College in California, his name is, bear with me, Mike Csikszentmihalyi, and it's even harder to spell than it is to pronounce, but he talks about a state called flow. I'm sure we've all heard of the concept of being in the zone. When an athlete is playing out of their mind, you know, when Tiger Woods can't miss a putt, or Jerry Rice catches everything that they throw in his direction, that sort of thing, where you're playing as good as you are physically capable of playing in this world. This is called being in a flow state. And he said we can produce this predictably by doing two things. Number one, you need to be challenged almost to the limits of your abilities. You can't go past, because then you start to drown. But if you don't get there, you're not sufficiently challenged to really engage yourself. The other half of it is what you're being challenged to do has to be a worthwhile cause, something you consider worthwhile. Not necessarily what the masses consider important, or what your parents told you was important when you were deciding on your major in college. It has to be something that you believe is a worthwhile cause. Now, when Roy Williams is streaking down the sideline, looking to catch a touchdown pass, for him, that is a worthwhile endeavor. So he is in that flow state. He is being challenged right to the limits of his abilities, because he's got two guys that are trying to prevent him from doing it. But it's also a worthwhile cause. That's 6 points on the board. That's the cheering of the crowd. This is a worthwhile cause. So we don't have to all be Mother Teresa. It is perfectly okay to want things that are not, acceptable to the majority. We don't have to save the world and so forth. So it's a challenge that is not too challenging at something that you consider a worthwhile cause. Now, the great thing is that Csikszentmihalyi's research has indicated that this flow state is what will reliably produce happiness for us. So people who spend more of their time in this flow state reported themselves as being happier. So this is another thing that's kind of counterintuitive, which is, what do we seek out in our lives? We tend to seek out comfort, leisure, free time, flexibility. We want the freedom to do nothing, primarily because that's what we perceive rich people as doing, and everybody would like to live that life of luxury. The problem is that does not convey happiness. How many times have you gone on a vacation, you've gone to Puerto Vallarta in Mexico with the explicit statement, I'm going to lie on the beach and do nothing for 2 weeks. How long does it last? Maybe 2 days, until you are so bored you can't stand it. Then what do? You go have an adventure. You go take a tour bus around the city, or you go climbing up into the mountains, or you learn how to parasail or water ski or whatever. Laying on the beach sounds good, gets dull very quickly. Now, if you fill your life up with the adventures that challenge you, that you think are worthwhile, again, you think are worthwhile, that's how you get that happiness. And if that seems a little too hedonistic for you, a little too selfish, think about it this way. If you have kids now, or you intend to have kids, intend to have grandkids in the future, what sorts of stories are you going to tell those kids when you're old and you're sitting in a rocking chair? Are you going to tell them about all the years you spent sitting in a cube doing finger exercises, or all the hundreds of thousands of hours you spent stuck in traffic commuting back and forth to it? No, you're going to tell them about the time Grandpa learned how to parasail in Puerto Vallarta, or when you rode a mountain bike up Pikes Peak, those sorts of things. What are your children going to tell their children about their childhoods? What did you do when you were a kid, Mom? Oh, we went to Europe and we rode the train around for 3 months and I learned to speak Italian. These are the adventures. These are the things that fill our lives up. So I'm going to leave you with the same sentiment that I started with, but now it's not going to be a curse. This is a blessing. May you live in interesting times, because those are the ones that are worth living.